Hey there, biology. I want to talk about the classification of life in this video. So let's get cracking. The science of naming and identifying and classifying organisms is called taxonomy. And there's going to be different levels of being able to identify any given living organism in the world based on its characteristics. So the whole idea of the naming system started with this guy named Carl Linnaeus. Look at that hair. I mean, I gave myself the old quarantine cut yesterday, and it's about as good as a guy with a pair of clippers and a mirror can do. But that hair, hats off to you, sir. So Linnaeus discovered, or he came up with the idea of calling organisms a standard name, meaning you wouldn't have one person say, "Oh, well, I saw a gray squirrel in the forest today," and someone else said, "Oh, well, I saw a puffy-tailed squirrel in the forest today." And in reality, they were talking about the exact same squirrel, but there was no standard way of identifying living organisms until Linnaeus comes along. And he has this thing called binomial nomenclature, which very simply means a two-name naming system. That's it. So we are going to use our two-name naming system and start with the level of classification called genus. And very simply, a genus is going to be the second most specific you can get when identifying a lion, a leopard, or a tiger, or really any type of organism. But we will see there's a lot of similarities between organisms in the same genus, i.e., all big cats up here. Down here, we have all bears. So, based on the genus name, we can tell a lot about an organism and what else it might be related to. Now, a couple formatting things. If you are writing this with your pen and pencil, you have to write it and underline it. You will also capitalize the first letter. If you are typing it, what you have to do is italicize it. So highlight it, push Control I, and now you have it italicized. So that's the first name in binomial nomenclature. The second is the species. And the species is the most basic unit you can get, the most specific you can get when you are talking about any given living organism. There is a general rule of thumb that any given species has to be able to breed with other members of that species. And if there's something that you're not quite sure, is this, is this that, if you put them together and they don't breed and they can't breed, they might not be of the same species. So we have to go way back and talk a little bit of history here because dear King Philip, this gentleman here, he is going to help us remember the ways to remember the the method of classifying organisms. So, dear King Philip did a thing. He came over for good soup. Each letter in this sentence represents a level of classification. And we just went through the idea of genus and species. But as we now move up, what we are doing is getting broader. So domain is the broadest way that we can classify an organism. Kingdom are going to be more specific, phylum more specific, all the way down to the most specific species. Get it? Specific species. It's right there in the name. So let's just break these down a little bit. In biology, there are three domains. That's it. We have eukaryotes, we have archaea, and we have bacteria. Archaea and bacteria are both prokaryotes. Eukarya are eukaryotes. So that's going to be where we are, because we are in the animal realm there. Plants, fungi, and other types of organisms, single-celled organisms called protists. So let's get a little more specific. Let's work our way down this level of classification to kingdom. And the grouping of organisms within a domain that have similar characteristics are going to be in a kingdom. And as you probably have guessed, these are all images of animals. Therefore, they are in the animal kingdom. But again, on the other hand, we could have put fungi up here. They're a separate kingdom. We could have put plants up here. They're a separate kingdom. Animals are just the ones that are the most fun to talk about. When we are moving down, again, more specific in the world of animals, what I have going on here, these are all vertebrate animals. So this is the phylum of the vertebrates. Breaking it down a little bit more specifically, a class, in this case, looking at all of these pictures, they all are mammals. So this is the group that is, they all share certain things in common. Most commonly known, which would be hair, also mammary glands, which is where mammals get their name, and the ability to feed their young with milk. Now, I just have this up here because we could look at our class and we could say how our biology class is different than your gym class or your history class or your English class. And it's because we are all in a very common situation. Order is going to be based on, again, traits, characteristics, similarities among different organisms. And all of these guys, these are all carnivores. They're in the order Carnivora. You don't really want to come across any one of these guys, especially this, the honey badger, because y'all know about the honey badger. Am I right? Family is going to be even more specific. So if I talk about you with your family, you have more in common with your family than you do with the neighbors next door, even though you're all people. You are more similar to your family. Not a best analogy if I'm continuing on with my examples of pictures over here. These are all canines. They are in the Canidae family. And canines are different than cats. They are in the Felidae family. So they're felines. So dogs and cats, they would be in their own separate family. And that leaves us with genus and species, where if you were to play a game of one of these things is not like the other, as you go down the pyramid here, you will see that, yeah, you can classify all of these things on the top. They're all animals, even the sea star. But when we go down to phylum Chordata, that means they are vertebrates. They have a backbone. The sea star doesn't, so we've eliminated that. Now we have the coral snake, which is a little bit different than everything else because that's a reptile. That's not a mammal, and everything else is a mammal. And then we go down. The squirrel, we kick off the order because they're not carnivores. Man, imagine a carnivorous squirrel. Don't imagine that. And then we move down to the family. The family Ursidae is in reference to bears, but what we have going on with our grizzly bear and our black bears, they have way more in common than the panda bear does. So we are kicking the panda bear out as we go down here, and the genus Ursus is in reference to bears that are living here in North America, and then we finally end up with Ursus arctos, which is the American grizzly bear. So this is a honeybee, and we'll just do the idea of classification one more time, going through the honeybee here. The honeybee, which by the way, its genus name is Apis, species name is Mellifera. Notice how I've written it, capital A for the genus, and the whole thing is italicized. Look at this guy. Don't you just want to pet him? All right. They are eukaryotes. And when we know that something is a eukaryote, we know quite a bit about it. We've said some of these things before in previous classes. So let's move down the lists to the fact that a bee is an animal. And something that's an animal is a multicellular organism, and it doesn't have cell walls. If it had cell walls, it would be either a plant or a fungi, and we don't have cell walls in bees, so therefore it has to be an animal. The phylum here, Arthropoda, means arthropods. These are bugs. These are the most successful animals that live on this planet, things that live in this phylum. There's many species of arthropods, and they have filled every niche that you could possibly think of. So as we continue on, the class of the honeybee is that they are insects, meaning they are not arachnids like a spider. They are insects with body segments that are going to have 3 sets of legs, so 6 legs, 3 body segments. The order of honeybees is called Hymenoptera, and that means that there are similarities between ants and bees and things like wasps. The general characteristics of things in Hymenoptera is that they have 2 pairs of wings and they can sting. Now, not all the time. I mean, that's where it says usually. Some ants don't have wings. Some ants can't sting. Some bees can't sting. Some bees don't have wings. And there's always going to be outliers, but there's enough in common that we've left them together in that order. The family for Apis mellifera is Apidae. And if you know anyone who keeps bees, they are an apiarist. That is the word for someone who keeps bees. The place they would keep bees would be called an apiary. And that word is actually, all of these are Latin terms, has to do with bees. And finally, we end up with Apis mellifera, which is this little bumbly guy who just watch it again and again and again. So the last thing I'll just mention about species is that when we are looking at biological species, there has to be in nature a way that things that can breed together can get together. Meaning you don't want to have big, vast oceans between different members of the same species, because they're not going to be able to go and breed together. They need a nice, easy way to hook up. And if they are isolated from other groups, then odds are we will have a new species potentially come about. And that we'll talk more about that in our next unit. But without those barriers that I was mentioning, we can have hybrids exist. So here we have a lion-tiger hybrid, and Carol Baskin's favorite animal right here. We are combining 2 things that don't really have any common ground in nature. Lions live in Africa, tigers live in Asia, and they would never meet in the world. But when we put them together, they do create a viable offspring, but it's neither a lion or a tiger. On the other hand, a donkey and a horse, that produces a mule. And one thing I'll say about these organisms is there's a rule of thumb. Generally, hybrid organisms are not really going to be good parents because they are sterile. So it's hard to have a baby if you're sterile. And then a dog-wolf hybrid. Looks like a husky, but it's not. It's a dog. It's a wolf dog. And it's got some wild wolf in it. You don't want to have one of these as a pet because it's definitely going to have a wild animal aspect to it. So last slide, leave it here. Some thumbs up. There's about 1.5 million species that have been classified, meaning someone has sat down, wrote all of the levels of classification, identified what it is, and said, this is now a species. In fact, I was in college with a guy who was able to identify a certain bacteria, and he was able to now name that bacteria. Kind of cool. Really cool, actually. But someone has to do it. And there's absolutely more species out there in the world that are just waiting to be discovered. Lots of bugs, lots of bacteria, lots of fungi. You're probably not going to go and find a big predator or anything like that anymore, but there's still places where taxonomy is important. So the way that the world is classified is something that you need to understand as we are talking about biology, because the terminology and the concept is just very, very important. So that's all I'm going to really say here for classification. This was longer than I wanted it to be, and hopefully you sped me up for it. But in any case, that is classification taxonomy. I'm out. Peace. Bye. Later. Gone.